AmaZulu have had a number of kings in the past century, and the coronation today is a sacred ceremony for them. In 1840, after the overthrowing of Dingane, the Zulu kingdom saw the coronation of Mpande Kasenzakakhona as its king, and then he reigned until 1872. It's said that this was the first time that a ceremony of that kind was held. Let's talk about this now with Dr. Maxwell Shamaze from the University of Zululand. We also have in studio, you'll see him in a moment, Professor Pitika Ntuli. If I can come to you first, Dr. Shamaze, let's talk about the coronation. I've touched on it slightly, but why it's such an important event in terms of a king assuming his rightful place in the nation. Okay, we don't have that guest. Let's come back to studio. We still have with me in studio Professor Pitika Ntuli. Prof, as we watch these pictures play out, and we're hoping to catch in the next few moments the departure of the king going to Moses Mabhida Stadium, how do you reflect on its significance?
I can only go back to 1879 when the British Prime Minister of the time, Benjamin Disraeli, said, "These Zulu people are a remarkable people. They defeat our generals, they convert our bishops, and they settle a dynastic line." What we see there, the display of the culture, the power, and the vibe that is actually there, you see how culture and history can keep people alive despite.
Culture and history keeping people alive. This is the first coronation in a lifetime for many of AmaZulu and many people in this country who aren't even isiZulu speaking. The last one was in 1971 with King Goodwill Zwelithini. Now that the world has changed so much, how does the new monarch go about keeping the monarchy relevant and indeed transform it when necessary?
I think what has always happened actually in Africa is that we have never been a static people. We are an evolutionary and revolutionary people. We are living now. When we were living up in those Newtonian types of either or. Now we are living in a society of interconnectedness. So the king, now the monarch, will have got to act in a manner in which reflects the time in which he lives. Should we be surprised to see him riding up on a motorbike or tweeting someone sitting in a restaurant? That's what the reality is, and people want to see role models for them.
And let's take more of those pictures from the stadium and the various other locations where we have reporters out today. While the Prof and I speak, let's take those full pictures so you can be able to enjoy them in the best way possible. And Prof, just on what you were talking about in terms of culture not being static. I mean, King Misuzulu now, we've seen in the last while make several public appearances. We have in the media been able to interview him multiple times. He's been praised in the time that he's succeeded his father and mother as having been a more accessible monarch or king, a leader. How important is it for the king to be accessible and to be seen among the people?
Traditionally the king is the people. His accessibility is a reflection of the spirit of the people that he leads. The king always has to be available to people. That's why there are always a retinue of people around to help whoever wants to meet up with the king. Those processes are around there. So he has got to be available to his people.
Let's go and see if we can bring back into the conversation Dr. Maxwell Shamaze with the University of Zululand. If you are able to hear me, Doctor, a very good morning to you, and thank you so much for your time on this historic day for AmaZulu in South Africa. I was asking you earlier to reflect first on the history of coronations for AmaZulu and why they're so absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Khototo. Thank you for the viewers. I think this is a historic moment in the history of South Africa now. But historically speaking, this event took place for the first time in 1840 on the 10th of February, when King Mpande was installed by Andries Pretoria as the Volksraad by the Volksrechters, because he had just defeated King Dingane at Amarkongo. And on the 5th of February, a traditional ceremony of coronation was held, attended by Kwana Buthelezi, attended by Mapi Takasoji at that time. Those were powerful chiefs at that time. And then this was followed on the 10th of February by the Volksraad, which was now a recognition by the four trackers. Remember at that time, there was a contest and a grab for land and cattle between the four trackers and the British and the Zulu Kingdom. And now to use Mpande as a buffer between the four trackers and the British, so he had to be recognized by the four trackers because he had just defeated King Dingane. And what is very interesting is that in 1839, and when he first met them along Tugela River, and then they also earmarked Prince Cetshwayo as heir apparent at the age of 15, and he assumed the reins in 1872. And at that time, it was the British were to make sure that he also gets into power. So this issue of coronation and recognition by the establishment and in South Africa today by the ruling party in terms of the constitution is a very historical trace, and it's very important. Its importance at this time now and this era is that for the first time this generation is witnessing this event. Remember, we have not seen this in our generation. The last events that we saw were the events of the Hailes Comet in 1989, right. The release of Nelson Mandela and the prisoners.
So we speak about the King of AmaZulu as the custodian of the language and the culture, but given that it's a role that is mostly ceremonial, what are the daily or regular duties and responsibilities of a leader of AmaZulu?
Is to inculcate a culture of Ubuntu, respect, and also self-reliance on his nation, and to serve as an example in terms of humility, in terms of reaching out to the poor and cultivating the land. You know, we must remember that the daily functions, the rights and responsibilities of the reigning monarch were spelled out in 1994. Remember, during that wrangle between the IFP and the ANC and the Klerk during negotiations, you know, the ANC presented a draft constitution to then King's written, so spelling out the responsibilities, and also and that paved the way for the IFP to participate in the election in 1994. But unfortunately, that did not materialize thereafter because there had to be international mediation. That didn't take place. There was no constitution for KwaZulu-Natal as promised. Then even the constitution of 1996 didn't have this role of the king, but it's well known. It was only a legislation of KwaZulu-Natal Traditional Governance Act of 2005 with one line which says they recognize the king. But it's well known. Even the protocol is there, it's written, it's well known what are the daily responsibilities of the king.
Dr. Shamaze, please hold on for me. I just want to point our viewers to the pictures that we're showing to one of my shoulders. You'll look this way. There it is. We're showing you that it is a motorcade, the vehicles that will accompany King Misuzulu Gazwelithini when he makes his way to the Moses Mabhida Stadium. We're expecting that to happen in the next 15 minutes or so, where he will then receive that certificate of recognition from President Cyril Ramaphosa. We've seen the arrival of former President Jacob Zuma in full traditional garb in the last few moments. We've also seen various members of royal families across the continent. Some of the foreign dignitaries who are expected to attend include the king's uncle, himself a monarch, King Mswati III from Eswatini. A king from Nigeria is also expected. Zambia and Zimbabwe also expected to send a delegation, and as and when we capture those movements, we'll bring them to you. But let me come back to you, Dr. Maxwell Shamaze, a historian at the University of Zululand. We've spoken about then the duties, the responsibilities, but as with most monarchs, they also have to find the cause, right? Kings historically would have led AmaZulu through big wars, battles for survival. The last king, Goodwill Zwelithini, had garnered some praise for how he led the response to the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 90s and the early 2000s. What then becomes the cause for this king?
Remember when he first appeared on your channels, he spelled out that his responsibility is to carry out the program of the late king. So what the late king did will be continued by the reigning monarch, and then also remember there are programs that are in place. He also has a foundation that is responsible for caring, looking after the needy. And remember, during the floods that took place recently, his foundation also brought food to those people who were needy, who were without the shelters and all that. So there's a program of action that the reigning king has. And at his request, in fact, you can even access it yourself, which spells out his duties. It's not just ceremonial, it's not just sitting there and then go and open provincial legislatures and all that. Remember, even when there's political conflict, that's why there are so many politicians who flood into the royal palace of Wakangela Mankenani. We have seen all of them, SSA, EFF, IFP, ANC itself, and recently the provincial leadership. The king is above politics. He's a constitutional monarch. He's not party political, and therefore anyone seen to be trying to grabbing him towards this direction politically will cause a stir, as it has been intermittently the case with the late monarch.
And I want us to talk about the king and politics later, Dr. Shamaze, but let's bring in another of our guests with us today, Professor Pitika Ntuli. And Prof, you are very focused on capturing history. This is the first time that we are seeing a televised coronation for a monarch of AmaZulu. When the last time it happened, it was under the apartheid regime. Now that it's happening now, it is a first record of a historic event. But how does that help us then to reflect and know of our past and better plan and anticipate the future?
It is. But before I say that, one of the key critical things that the king does, he is the one who is in charge of the land. That's a land question.
Ingonyama Trust comes to mind.
Yeah, that's where also Ingonyama Trust comes. Yes, the recording of history is a very important thing. We have been recording history, traditionally, through Inganewane, through initiation ceremonies. That's how people do. When people go to initiation schools, they are being taught their own kind of history. But we are now in a position in which we can visually see the history being actually made. And these records would actually be kept for as long as records are able to be kept. 100 years from now, people who will be there will be able to see what is happening here today. The importance of technology is so important that we have some old people here now who are about 95, 96, 97 in the rural areas. Take a camera there, record what they say, and it can come out actually even as a book. So this is very, very significant that people could see it exactly happening. Because if we did not have television, only maybe a few hundred people or 1,000 people would have been there. But now the whole world is seeing how we are doing our things and witnessing the glory and the power of the Zulu nation.
Many will ask then, who perhaps aren't familiar or aren't in fact in favor of monarchies, kings and queens, why do we need them in a world that has increasingly been run by democratically elected governments?
They will only ask that when it is Africa. When you get over to Europe, the Queen just died after 82 years. And what did they do in Britain? They got up their chiefs and put them into the House of Lords. So that tradition and modernity...
Prof, pardon me, let's just take the arrival of King Misuzulu's uncle, King Mswati III, arriving from Eswatini. Let's go back to those pictures from the lobby, please. There it is, the moment King Mswati III arrives for his nephew's coronation as the leader of AmaZulu, having travelled from Eswatini. There had been concern that members of the SACP would lead a demonstration against his attendance today due to the socio-economic situation back in Eswatini and political repression, as we've been reporting on, in fact, even on Newzroom Afrika in the last year and a half, a worsening situation, people increasingly going hungry. The SACP has said that while it's got misgivings about him and his governing of Eswatini, it will respect today's ceremony and there won't be, shall we say, any sort of disruption or protest. But he has now arrived with about an hour or so to go until his nephew arrives at Moses Mabhida Stadium. His sister was the mother to King Misuzulu, Queen Mantombi, who passed shortly after her husband. She'd been regent when she passed in April last year. 3 weeks, I think it was, after King Goodwill Zwelithini had succumbed to COVID-19 related complications. Amabuto not wasting any time, as you see, getting things going. Plenty of cultural or culture on display in terms of music and dance. There is former President Jacob Zuma having a conversation. Many pictures will be taken today. Perhaps let's take in what's going on now in the stadium, and then we'll come back to Professor Pitika Ntuli and Dr. Maxwell Shamaze. Sights and sounds from Moses Mabhida Stadium, watching Newzroom Africa's continuing coverage of the coronation of King Zulu Kings Zwelithini. What's happening today is he will be receiving that official certificate recognizing him as the leader of AmaZulu. Not too long ago, this year in August, I think it was, he then received, or he underwent a ritual traditionally marking his ascension to the throne, the entering of the Kralwigena Isbayeni, I think is how it's phrased in isiZulu. Zianda and the others who are better versed will explain it further. You're looking now at another of our camera angles. Amabuto making their way into the Moses Mabhida Stadium in Durban. That stadium today will be able to take up to 48,000 people. Let's listen to some of what's going on, and as we do that, our reporter Linda Mnisi is listening in. Linda, when you can, give us what's going on from where you're standing.
All right, Mbegile, after hours and hours of waiting and people coming from different parts of the country, Amabuto are now moving into the stadium. You would have seen earlier on some of the young maidens as well as some of the Amabuto really eating and preparing to get into the stadium. But now what you're seeing, just after the arrival of some of the royal family members, many of whom you see in front of this large contingent of Amabuto, as soon as they arrived, they started gathering Tembegile, and they're now moving into the stadium where, of course, that program will get underway. So we're expecting then that once they are in, it's also another sign that the king may be close to arriving at the stadium. Of course, for that certificate handover ceremony which will take place today. We're also seeing among some of the Amabuto, often, we see him lead them, Prince Vanana there in front, among some of the royal family members who are here, Tembegile.
And Linda, when you look at the numbers of people still arriving, we were expecting things to have got going already now. How many more people are we seeing make their way to Moses Mabhida?
In fact, from where we are, Tembegile, it's just one of the many arrival points for, of course, those who will be gathered here at Moses Mabhida. And earlier on, I made reference and an emphasis on the issue around the taxis. 200 minibuses were told would be carrying people who are coming to this event. And from this part, Blue Lagoon, just next to the ocean, we saw quite a number of those. Some of the people have already entered into the stadium. I want us to take a listen to the sounds right now as many are jumping for joy. It's that moment really when the program will get underway. Of course, the king will not be in the stadium unless this contingent has arrived. All right, so Tembegile, these are live visuals that are coming from outside the Moses Mabhida Stadium. The Amabutho also part of today's celebration, a mere or even a handover, the certificates, the handover of that certificate of recognition by President Cyril Ramaphosa. A happy and joyous occasion for the AmaZulu nation, who've also had their fair share of, turbulence when it comes to what we've seen play out in the royal family, but also in the AmaZulu nation. Quite a number of things that have happened, and what you're seeing and have always seen is this large contingent always in full support of the King, Mrs. Zulu Kazwelithini Tembeki.
Linda, let's stay with your pictures. Keep those stable for us. And I'll go back now to Dr. Maxwell Shamaze from the University of Zululand. And Doctor, as we look at Amabutho now making their way to Moses Mabhida, I've heard them in the last few days referred to as the King's Blanket. Speak to us about their role in this celebration, this ceremony today, and why they're so close to the monarch.
From time immemorial, Amabutho have played a very significant role. They serve as a shield. In fact, even the kings, they used Amabutho to win battles. They are the ones who brought fame and awe to the kings. Or even King Shaka. He wouldn't be King Shaka without Amabutho. And they listened to him and they were loyal to him. And they serve as the foundation, as a means of protection for the nation, not just for the king. And they play a very significant role, not just in war, but in terms of ceremonies such as these ones, and even in terms of making sure that the security of the nation.
And when you talk about the security of the nation, we saw them play that role, didn't they, when we began to see division in the royal family, where when one of them had spoken out of turn, so to speak, there was a very stern rebuke from the royal house. Loyalty to the king, I'm sensing, is absolutely imperative if you want to be part of this regimen.
Yes, they did voice out. Remember the Izinduna or the Abatitiele, those who are responsible for the regiments and all that, they did speak out. And even Amabutho, they did speak out. They said if this thing continues and then there will be blood, they even said they were waiting for the king to give them a word. We all know what that means. If they're waiting for the king to give a word, it's a word to say fight or attack them or silence them. So that's the way. So the king couldn't say that, and the king, on the contrary, he spoke peace and he extended an olive branch to those royal rebels, so-called royal rebels. Amabutho did speak, and immediately after Amabutho spoke, you could see there was some kind of silence on those noises and all that. Instead, they went to Johannesburg and Fourways to hold media briefings. Instead, they couldn't make a single media briefing here in KwaZulu-Natal simply because Amabutho would be there and silence them.
Right. Doctor, can I ask you to just hold on for us? We're going to take a quick breather. Dr. Maxwell Shamaze, while we're speaking to the doctor, we showed you pictures of two former heads of state attending today, former Presidents Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma, sitting with one person between them. I see they've both been asked for selfies. Wonder if they'll take one together, given their political history. We continue our coverage of what's going on at Moses Mabhida Stadium today in a moment. Stay with Newzroom Afrika.